welcome. Excited to have everyone here today. We are going to be talking about Kanban, which should be very interesting. I know this was a lot of the concepts from Kanban for me were a very big eye-opener when I first started learning about it and using it and applying it. A couple quick things. If you would like a copy of my book, a digital copy, and do not have one, there is the URL. You can go to that URL and it will get you on the list for these invites and get you a download of the book. If you have trouble with it, just email me. I'll make sure it gets to you. Next thing I want to mention is the Agile cartoons that we have up on YouTube. Those can be found at youtube.com/markshed. So just my name. I've got some new ones of these coming. We're working on a series to do like a 5 to 10 minute cartoon about each Agile principle. I think we're working on number 6 or 7 right now. So those will be coming there. If you go there and subscribe to it, you'll get notified when the new ones come out. Other channel I want to mention is youtube.com/AgileLnL. That's where all of these go. They actually get streamed live to it and then are posted there afterwards. So that can be a good place if you're wanting to look up something that was mentioned before. If you missed something and want to look for it. As always, though, if you got questions, feel free to just send me an email and I'm happy to help any way I can. Okay, so here's our schedule coming up. Next week, we're going to be looking at Agile missteps, unexpected consequences. So what happens when, I think that's next week, is that it? Like today's the 20th? Yes, that looks right. So we're going to look at a lot of situations, not just in Agile, but where people did things well-meaning and got very different results than what they thought they were going to get, and how that happens in Agile teams as well. So it should be pretty interesting, and we're going to have some cool history things in there from that I've been looking at. After that, on the 9th, we're going to talk about Agile principles and risky barbecue. I did this one a few years ago. Some friends got together, we got together and decided we wanted to try to pit roasting a pig. And the process of doing that involved using a lot of Agile principles, including renting an excavator for my kids. 16th, talking about the curse of the testing pyramid. I know the testing pyramid is something you probably hear about a lot. We're going to talk about what that is and how it can be beneficial, but how it might be able to misguide us sometimes if we don't use it properly. 23rd is to be determined. If you have some great ideas for that, send me a message. And then on the 31st, we've got penciled in. Because I don't have the title yet, but Chris Stone. Chris has done some really interesting things with themed retrospectives. He's known as the remote Agile coach. So I'm really looking forward to having him on the Lunch and Learn on the 31st. Okay. So, on with our talk. What is Kanban? Actually, give me a thumbs up. Can everybody hear? Oh, okay. Is this working okay? Video and audio looking good? Throw in the chat if you're having a problem. Okay, great. Okay, cool. I'm glad to see there's people excited about Chris joining us. Interesting, this picture, I was trying to look something for assembly line because I thought that worked good. And I pulled this off, and when I've looked at it more closely, I pulled it off of one of the sites that, royalty-free sites. When I looked more closely at like this guy's face and hands and this guy's face right here, I think this might be a like an AI generated image. There's a couple things that kind of gave me that. So just a side note, because when it was small, it looked perfect. But anyway, what is Kanban? Let me throw some books up here. Here are some great things if you want to learn about Kanban, some great books. And I'm going to put links to these books in the email that I send out, which actually I should let you know that. If you've attended this and you typed in your email address, I will follow up with an email that's going to cover the links to things we talked about, links to these books, particularly the ones that are free and you can just download and read. I'm also going to follow up with a link, I put it in the chat earlier, but a link to that will get you a 90-day trial of Kanbanize, which is a nice tool. It's what I use personally for managing our business, a Kanban board. The advantage of using the link that I'm going to send you is it gets you 90 days trial with it. If you do decide to keep using it, I think I get some type of benefit from that. I don't know. Most people just use it, and it's a great place to play around with. But that will be coming in an email, including links to these books. The blue book here is kind of the first one, David Anderson, kind of probably one of the first books kind of talking about using Kanbans for software. Highly recommend the Pocket Guide from prokanban.org. That one's great. Making Work Visible. Yes, that's another great one. That's really good. Somebody had posted that to me. That's another really great one that I did not get on here. Anyway, I'll be sending links out to these so you can find it, but these are some great resources. Okay, So what word comes to mind when you hear Kanban? And you should be, let me get this link out here. You should be able to get to this from, should be able to get to it from inside of WebEx. But if you prefer the link, you can get to it from there as well. Okay, pull, organization, visual board, manufacturing, Scrum board. These are all good words. Flow, it's a good one. Agile for lazy developers. Oh, that's, I haven't heard that one before. That's great. Okay. Pull system, organization, inventory management, Kanban cards in manufacturing, the best flow, cycle time, WIP, swarming, limit work in progress. So these are all great things that come up with it. And it looks like a lot of you have experience with Kanban. A few years ago, I've been in other groups where these were not the types of words we were getting. So this is awesome. Okay, so first let's start with the important thing. How do you pronounce it? Okay, so question for you. How do you pronounce Kanban? Does it rhyme with can, like Kanban, or does it rhyme with bonbon or Kanban? And I will giving you a hint. I consider either of these to be correct, but I did get a hold of a friend of mine in Japan and ask him, so I have the Japanese pronunciation, which I'll show you in just a minute. Oh, and the German pronunciation is even different. Okay, so you can pronounce it however you want, but I will encourage you to do, according to my friend in Japan, it's actually rhymes with bonbon. He said the ah sound is like in mama in English. So Kanban is the way they would pronounce it in Japanese. Oh, really? Somebody's saying they see that it was the second one that rhymes with can. Okay, there may be different opinions on it, I guess. But I will encourage you this. If you want to pronounce it like this, Kanban, that's probably fine. If you want to pronounce it Kanban, that's probably fine too. And evidently there's a German way to pronounce it as well. What I wouldn't do is this, right? I wouldn't say it's Kanban or Kanban. That's just kind of, that people might laugh at you if you do that. But Kanban, Kanban probably doesn't matter all that much. And if somebody's saying that, I think somebody put in the chat that Kanban is how they learned to pronounce it in Japanese. So my friend, who's not a native Japanese speaker and has been living there for several years, he might be misinformed. I'll have to find out. Okay, so yeah, don't cross them. Kanban and Kanban, probably don't want those. Okay, so what is Kanban? We'll try to pronounce it that way for now. Well, it can be confusing because it's lots of different things, right? We've got a Kanban system, a Kanban board, and then we've got the Kanban method, and then other things too. So we're going to look at what some of these things are. Oh, I like this idea. Let's go try to find out. I'll go to Japan and find out. That sounds great. Okay, so let's start by thinking about a Kanban system. So Kanban was developed by Toyota. I mean, the idea had been around, but this is where a lot of the ideas started really coming together, was Toyota. So, question for you, where did Toyota look for inspiration on how to improve their inventory management? What Toyota was discovering is they had lots of money tied up in parts that were throughout the manufacturing process. And the more parts there were in the manufacturing process just sitting there, that was just capital that wasn't being deployed. It wasn't actually producing a return on investment yet. So they went and looked for it. They went and looked for a model in another industry. And so our options here are grocery store fruit tracking, Napoleon military tactics, Olympic training methods, or World's Fair trash pickup. And when I put this in here, when I put that on the thing years ago when I first did this talk, there was a reason for that because there was something really interesting about the World's Fair trash pickup, I think in St. Louis. I don't remember what the actual story was behind that. I'll have to look that up now. But the answer is grocery store fruit stocking. And the reason is because they were looking at grocery stores and they said, hey, this is kind of interesting. Grocery stores, if they don't actually get their product through and sell it, it rots and it's not worth anything. And so they said, let's look how grocery stores actually manage getting things through from where it's picked all the way through the supply chain into the hands of the customer, because grocery stores have to move it quickly. They can't let you could take a car and let the bumper sit around for a while and then still put it on a car and sell it. But grocery stores don't have that luxury. So they said, if we can figure out how grocery stores do it, we can probably get really good at our ability to manage our inventory. So that brings us to the question, what does Kanban mean? What is the meaning of the word Kanban? Like if you were to translate the word. Sign, visual flow, quick flow, card, signboard, flow, card. Okay, so we got a lot of people saying card or sign. When I went to look this up and what I have heard, and it may mean multiple things. So these are watching a board. Okay, that's cool. Continuous flow. Okay, so when I go and ask Google, it says Kanban translates as signboard, or I've also seen it as billboard. So you think this big thing up there that tells you something, right? It's got information. And like I said, there may be other may translate to different things into different contexts. But I think this is an interesting idea of thinking of one of the key parts of Kanban is we're visualizing stuff so everybody's clear on exactly what's being said and what it means and what the state of our system is. So one of the definitions I've heard is it's a system to manage the flow of work through a process, or it balances between capacity and demand, limits the work in progress. And if we think of our grocery store example, right, we don't want to have thousands and thousands of apples shipped and then just sitting there and rotting before we can get them to the customer. It's the process of trying to pull value out versus trying to push work in. So these are all pieces of or ways to describe a Kanban system. Now, question for you though, what does your organization most focus on? Are you more focused on pulling value out of the system or pushing work into the system? And this could be a development system or some other type of work. Or does your organization just focus on randomly changing things for no apparent reason? Which could be a very legitimate answer, right? That's that does happen. Okay, it looks like most of us, the idea of pulling value out of a system has about 30%. The pushing work into the system or randomly changing things kind of has the other, which probably indicates there's some room for improvement, right? The idea of pulling value out of a system implies that we can actually identify what the valuable thing is to pull out, and we have a mechanism of prioritizing that and getting it through the process. So this is ideal, right? Because if we can do this, then it means a lot of things are being done correctly. It means there's a lot of things going on of describing how we, it means that a lot of our work is set up in a way that is, we know what's going on, we know how valuable it is, and we can prioritize things correctly. Somebody said using Scrum is a pull system. That can be true. I've seen Scrum be used as a push system in a lot of situations as well. So I think even using Kanban, people can use a Kanban board and think about pushing things in rather than pulling things out. So this is very much a kind of a mindset of how you view your work. And I think it can be used in a lot of different places and can be misused by going the other way. Okay, you probably heard this said before, the idea of finishing versus starting. Focus on the value you can pull out of a system rather than the work you can push in it. Focus on finishing rather than trying to start new work. Now, this is interesting. I'm going to have to look this up when we get back to it. Thanks, John. I'll have to come back to that because that looks very interesting. I'll get tied up with it for a few minutes. Stop starting and start finishing. You'll probably hear this mentioned a lot of times in Agile. It's very relevant to the idea of pulling work out of the system. So we talked a little bit about a Kanban system, but now let's talk about a Kanban system is often represented by a Kanban board, right? Which makes sense if we're thinking of, although the wild boar thing is pretty interesting, I'm going to look this up, but we're thinking of Kanban being kind of a billboard or a sign. The board is kind of where we're centered around how we visualize stuff. So a billboard that I like to think of as a billboard that visualizes the state of a work system and signals when capacity is available. So it's got this signaling aspect to it as well. Here is something interesting. If you travel across the Midwest, particularly through rural areas, probably other areas there was, you have probably encountered some of these things. Give me a thumbs up if you've ever seen one of these or something similar to this somewhere. You experienced these? Okay. So this was a collection of pictures from different ways that gas stations make sure they don't lose their key. So to the bathroom. So the idea is you can get the key to the bathroom from the front desk, but that way they're just making sure it's for actual customers. But they want to make sure that the key actually comes back. So I like this one right here, the big ball and chain. I don't even know where you'd get something like that, but they seem to have one. Although it doesn't look very heavy, or it's sitting on the floor because he's holding it with 2 fingers. This one, which is a giant sign that says men's on it, the shovel, the please bring me back home, I'm afraid of the dark. So we've got all these things to make sure, and the main purpose of these is to make sure that the key comes back. But if you think of it from this standpoint, oh, lots of other places too, okay. When we were in Mexico, there was a place, we were on a bus and it stopped somewhere, and you had to pay $2 to get to the restroom. But the restroom was very, very clean, and it was worth every penny of it. It was very, very nice, and they were managing the capacity and demand just by charging money for it. But if we think of this, think of something like this. We've got these 2 keys that are up on the wall maybe, and one's for the women. You've got 2 restrooms here. This is basically showing the state of the system. Right now, the system has full capacity. It's not at full capacity. It's fully available. And at this point, half of the system is actually available, right? And Astrid just pointed out that you're very, very observant. Yes, the 2 keys here are the same in this case. But yes, we've got now we're at half capacity, right? And we could use this to keep track of the state of the system. This is a very simple Kanban board. It keeps track of the state of the system, what the capacity is to do work, how much availability there is. Another example I've heard of was somebody that was going through, it was a big park in some other country. And when you walk in, they give you a ticket. And there's only 200 tickets printed, and when you get done, you return the ticket and it's available for someone else. But that way they make sure that there's only 200 people or whatever the limit was in the park. So a very simple way for balancing the capacity and the demand. Now here's another interesting thing. I was at IKEA in Kansas City. I don't know if they still have this. This was a few years ago. And there were these vests, and up on the wall were all these vests. And it was in the kids area. And what would happen is when a kid came and the parent wanted to check the kid into the kid activity area while they went shopping for lamps and stuff, each kid would get one of these vests on, man. It came down from the wall. And so the wall was showing how much capacity there was to handle more kids. And once they were out of vests, then the capacity was full. So the vest would disappear as they were given to kids. Well, and then when a kid would leave, they'd put the vest back up on the wall. Now, this may have changed after COVID. I don't know. But it was a very simple Kanban system, and it was very easy to see if there was capacity. It also had the advantage of, it was very easy, parent comes in and wants to check their kid in, and the person working there said, I'm sorry, we don't have any more vests. And that sounds almost like a silly thing. Why couldn't they just say, no, we're at capacity? But there's a huge mental difference of being able to point to this thing on the wall and saying, see, there's no more capacity. Once the vest shows up, then there is capacity. In having that conversation, that's a lot easier conversation to have than just saying, no, we're at capacity. We can't fit your kid in. And I want you to think about that, because as we look at some of the different Kanban boards and ways to design stuff, this is a very powerful thing of Kanban to make sure that you're not shoving more work into the system just because there's no real visual indication that the system is at capacity. And that's it's subtle but very, very powerful. It's one of the really big things you get with a well-designed Kanban board is it gives you a way to have conversations of here's what's going on. If you want to put more work if you want to add work to the system, we need to either wait till we finish something or we need to pull something out, because here's how the system actually works efficiently. We're not just going to keep shoving kids into this room. The system is at capacity. You can either wait till someone else comes in or go someone leaves, or go find a parent and pay them to take their kid out, and then there's capacity for yours, whatever. Okay, so here is a typical Kanban board. And if you look here, we've got our stuff that's ready, we've got our stuff in requirements, we've got our stuff in development, stuff that's going through testing, and the stuff over here that's done. And we'll talk more about how this works here in a minute. In this particular case, we're saying that our capacity is to have 2 things in any of these middle columns where the work is actually being done. So in the development column, we actually have the capacity to pull something else into development. So we could pull that green thing in requirements over. Here's another picture of a Kanban board. Let's see, is this? Okay, this one actually is from Kanban Eyes. So another Kanban board. And if you use Jira, there's ways to represent Kanban boards there. I'll give you a really good tip for Jira here in a little bit that's really powerful. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Ticket or card usually represents a story. It can represent other things, but generally that's what you're wanting to do. What if we haven't defined capacity? Good question. You need to have some idea what it looks like. Okay, so we've got ticket card usually represents a story. So it could be a user story. It could be a request for raw materials. If you look at a ticket in manufacturing, oftentimes these are being used to send signals back and forth for we need more inventory, or there's a demand for it here, and there's capacity to supply here. Could be a request for raw materials. Homework assignments. We use something like this with our kids for a while to keep track of when they were doing work, and we needed to score the work to try to keep track and keep that balanced and making sure that we weren't becoming the bottleneck for what they needed to do. I've also seen people use it to represent fields and crops. Particularly when working with software, the ideal thing is for this to represent something that you actually can say, this is valuable. This is something that's valuable to the customer. This is something the customer is paying for. If you get too granular, it's easy to do a lot of work and move lots of stuff across the board. But if it's not within the units of how the customer is seeing the value that they're getting, it's easy to be less optimal in how you're delivering work. Okay, so also most Kanban boards are going to have some type of way to represent the status of a ticket. Remember how I said that it's a pull system? So we don't want to pull work over until it's done, right? We don't want to pull something into development until the requirements are done. In this case, we're saying this is the status of the ticket. This is done with requirements. Now, there's no capacity to pull that ticket over yet, but it's ready when we can. Over here, so this is ready to pull. Over here, this one, we're going to say white represents in progress, and the red means it's blocked. So if we look at this board and we need to get some work done, we've got all this work right here with the green that's ready to go. Probably our focus should be on getting this unblocked right here so it can be finished, and then we'll have capacity to pull the thing from development into testing, and capacity to pull the thing from requirements into development, and then we can pull the thing from ready into requirements. Now, notice that's kind of the opposite of how I've seen a lot of teams work, to where what they start doing is they start on the left-hand side of the board and say, hey, we've got these things ready. Let's push them over so people can start working on requirements. And this is where the idea of Scrum being a pull-based system, I think you definitely can use it like that. But I've seen a lot of Scrum teams that are starting at the left-hand side and working at pushing stuff in, instead of starting here and saying, what can we actually finish? Now, it's not because Scrum tells you to do it that way, but that's how it often gets done, because it's easier to say, hey, these things are ready, let's push them into requirements. Up there at the top is the work in progress limit. So how many things we're allowed to have in this column. Okay, so that's a simple Kanban board. Those are the simple concepts that you'll see a lot of in Kanban. And there's different ways to represent whether something's blocked or whether it's done. You might have another column that says done with requirements, and that's representing that's done. There's lots of different ways to model this. I personally like seeing it staying in the same column and just having an indicator just say, hey, this is done, this is ready to pull, these are ready to move over to the other side, because it kind of forces you to think about where are bottlenecks, and there's some statistics you can get from that type of approach that are harder in other situations. Okay, so the third thing I'm going to talk about was Kanban method. So we talked about a Kanban system, Kanban board, Kanban method. Kanban method was kind of developed around, like that blue book I mentioned, David Anderson and his company, and then kind of the thought leadership that grew up around that. Now, most of that information you can find at Kanban University. There's lots of training and different things around that. The Kanban method has evolved to something that looks kind of like what you would see with principles and values and things like that, what you see with Scrum, what you see with Agile. So we'll look at those briefly. Kanban method usually refers to itself as a method for understanding how work is done, which isn't too different than what we defined earlier, but this is how, at least at the last time I looked at how they were defining it. It may have evolved over time. A method for defining and managing and improving services that deliver knowledge work, or a method for understanding the current state of a system and managing continual improvement. Now, notice none of these things are specific to software. This is very, very general, but mostly focused on things. There's some type of knowledge taking place here as probably separate than, or knowledge aspect to it as probably separate from manufacturing. So another important from Kanban method, another important thing I want to pull out of that. There's lots of we could spend days on this, but improving a system means managing change, and this is what Kanban method is trying to kind of the way it looks at things. We're wanting to improve a system by managing change. So we're going to talk about J curve, but first I want to ask you, do you know where the idea of a J curve comes from? And a J curve is the idea that when you make a change, you may do a little bit of a J before you go back up. So the idea of each major column having its own ready column, I've seen systems designed like that, and that can work really, really well. My preference, and this is more of a personal preference, but is to have the previous column have some way of indicating in that previous column that the work is done in this column and it's just sitting there before it goes. And so you don't have to have a ready column because there's some indication on the card itself. That's pretty easy to do with Jira because you can have multiple states within the same column. It's a little bit harder to do in some other systems, and in those having a column for their works well. The reason I like it is because it means you've got fewer. The reason I like having the indication on the card when it's ready to pull is it makes it easy to see kind of where your bottlenecks are in ways that, I don't know, just in my brain trigger more, here's the area we need to focus on. You can get the same information from either way though. So yes, J curve comes from global finance, and it's the idea that when a country is going through difficulties and they need to devalue the currency, so there's the big change that when you devalue a currency in a country, things get a lot worse before they start getting better. So it does this J shape. Well, this idea in Kanban is an important piece of Kanban method of thinking about the fact that you need to be able to make changes that may be temporarily painful in order to get to where you want to go. So if we kind of change can make things worse before it gets better, and that does come from global finance, so that is correct. Probably applies to a lot of areas as well. So if we think of our progress as something like this, we start to go up and then we plateau and then we make a change and it gets worse, but then we're able to get higher than we were before. We make another change and it gets worse, and then we get higher, and you're kind of making those types of steps. Often what happens is we end up at a place here where we've kind of plateaued and a change is made. Then the person who suggested the change is fired, and then management congratulates themselves on having fixed the problem, when the real issue was the person that suggested the change was right all along. They just had to get through that change. And this is where Kanban method tries to say that it's a way to survive change, right? It's a way to make sure that you're thinking through how you're going to make changes in a small enough way that you can wait long enough to see the impact of those changes and actually survive it, learn from it, and move on. So this is a big piece of Kanban method, and it's very fascinating, the stuff involved in that, the Kanban.university. Here's the values from Kanban method: transparency, balance, collaboration, customer focus, flow, leadership, understanding, agreement, and respect. And I've got another talk where I've gone through all of these things in detail. That's not what we're looking at today, but I did want to call, and then there's also principles. One of the principles is start with what you do now, improvement through evolutionary change, encourage acts of leadership at every level, focus on customers' needs and expectations, manage the work, let people self-organize around it, and evolve policies to improve outcomes. Start with what you do now. Now, pro Kanban would, in a lot of their stuff, they kind of argue a little bit against this, because if what you're doing now isn't Kanban, then just saying you're starting with it doesn't automatically make it Kanban. What I do like about this, though, is a lot of times we don't know what we're doing now. And if we can move to the step of being able to really visualize so everybody agrees that this is what we're actually doing, that's a huge step forward, because you often need to understand what you're doing today so you can know what you can improve incrementally. That J curve idea, if we don't know what we're doing today and we change a lot of stuff and things get painful, it's going to be really hard to understand the cause and effect of those things. Like, what did we actually change that caused this? So starting with what you do now, I think is very valuable, although I appreciate Pro Kanban's argument that if you just start with what you're doing now, it might not actually be Kanban. So here's an example, right? Ready, requirements, development. wait for Joe. We've got all these things that are waiting for Joe. Testing, wait for Tom. We got all these things that are waiting for Tom. We got production and then done. Now, this might look horrible to have on a board, but this is what you're actually doing now. Now, this might be a little passive aggressive to actually put people's names up there, but the idea is this is what you're actually doing. Starting with modeling that is probably a very good place to start to be able to incrementally make changes from. If you model the process that you would like it to be, you're likely to miss something, and you may not actually have enough authority to just completely change the process, and it could be very dangerous. There might be a reason that you need to wait for Joe. Maybe you shouldn't take that out of there, but maybe that function can be done in a way that doesn't require put Joe on the daily stand-up or something like that, and then that column doesn't have to exist anymore. Okay, practices from Kanban method with Kanban University. Visualize, limit whip, manage flow, make policies explicit, feedback loops, and improve and evolve. The visualize is a big piece that you're going to see in any different way that you look at Kanban, is making sure that you have a way to really see what's going on. There was a book, I think it was a graphic designer, and he liked to refer to what he did as, and the name of the book was Making the Invisible Visible. I was managing some graphic designers at the time I ran into that book, and it was a really fascinating look at how do we take things that we can't see and make them where we can see it. So if we look at this work right here, without having some way to represent this is going to be really hard to really, this is invisible work, right? The development, yeah, we know development work is being done, but it's really hard to represent the status of where the bits are before it goes to the customer. An example of visualization that I really like came from auto manufacturing. They were trying to increase their the quality of their cars. And, they had all this effort to try to make the cars better and stuff. And then someone finally said, okay, we've got a picture of the car. When it rolls off the line and we inspect it, put a red X wherever there's a problem on the car. So they did, like, okay, we had a problem here. And okay, next problem we had was right here. And next one was here. Another one was here. And they just did that as the cars rolled off whenever there was a problem. And after a while, just this simple visualization made it easy to see that there was one area on this car that they could spend their time that would be a whole lot more effective than all the other things other places they could possibly spend their time. And this type of visualization, it's very simple, very low tech. We just put an X wherever the thing was on the car when it came off the line if there was a problem with it. But it's an idea of how visualization can make your data point you to the problem in ways that you might not see otherwise. If they had to just try to increase the entire quality of the line, this might have been like, let's say they reduced the quality across the line by 50%. Well, that might be good. That would be a great thing. But if they could get rid of all the problems right here, they'll make a bigger step toward their quality. And this helps point to where those areas are worth investing in. So a question for you with your team: how do you visualize your work? Do you do it on whiteboards, a wall with sticky notes, a software tool, Jira, Kanbanize, something like that? On paper, or it's just in our imagination? We all are great at visualizing stuff, so we can see it there. Yeah, this is a good point. Yes, if you can't move the car, that might be the place to start. In this case, though, keep in mind that was hundreds of cars coming off, and just where there happened to be a problem on the car. It wasn't one car with lots of problems in those places. It's as they rolled off the lines. Okay, so most of them visualize our work with a software tool, Jira, or something like that. There's lots of huge advantages of that, particularly if your team is distributed. There's lots of huge advantages of some of these whiteboard wall with sticky notes and some of the physical things as well that I think sometimes we overlook. Although the software tools are getting a lot better. You can do some incredible things with them nowadays. Okay, limit whip and manage flow. So what happens when we lower the amount of, never mind, that's from slide for another slide. Okay, so here's where we're limiting our work in progress. We're saying we can only have 2 things in here. Now, this is just arbitrary. Your team might be 3 things. Your team may be 1 thing. Your team may be 4 things. This is something that you have to experiment with and figure out what gives you the best flow. But you need some way to indicate when you're trying to do something that makes you go beyond your work in progress limit. I think Jira and other tools will sometimes put things in red. Some tools will actually block you to where you're not allowed to put something in. I like my tools to inform me because more than block me, because there might be a reason that you need to for some reason, as long as the entire team understands why you've got the work in progress limit there and everybody's bought into the purpose behind it. Having the tool fight you may not be what you want. But in this case, we're making it red to say you're over the work in progress limit. This assumes every team has the same skill set. This kind of assumes that you've got a cross-functional team, but not necessarily. And I'll show you an example here in a little bit where we've got people assigned to things. Okay, practices. There was a list of the practices again, which we went through. Okay, so that was Kanban method, Kanban.university. It's a very useful place. Lots of great stuff there. They're very focused on selling you training, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but lots of good thought leadership around Kanban. I encourage you to check that out. Now let's look at prokanban.org, kind of their approach to things, because it's a very different way of looking at stuff. And kanbanguides.org is where they've published a very concise document of kind of here's the core of what we think is Kanban. The Kanban Pocket Guide is a lot more substantial. It's freely available, nice PDF, and it's got a lot more details. Really, really good stuff. And they also have lots of training as well that you can go through with them. Their take on things is more saying, what are the smallest things that we can say this is Kanban, and set up in a way that it will evolve toward improving stuff. So their stuff is a lot smaller, and there's big advantages in that, right? Because it's more focused on the key things that make something Kanban, where the Kanban method with Kanban University is more all-encompassing, like it's a complete system that can be used for stuff. Some of that, well, various reasons for that. Anyway, what they're saying is the practice are you define and visualize a workflow, you actively manage items in a workflow, and you're working on improving that workflow. And I like this because it's really fundamental, right? We figure out what the work needs to be, and we have a way of visualizing it, and then we're actually managing how the work goes through it, and we're looking for ways to make it better. That's great. It's beautiful, concise, easy, and if you are doing this, you will likely evolve a lot of the stuff that you'll find in that we talked about just a minute ago. They also Pro Kanban also looks at Kanban measures. So you should be measuring your work in progress. The number of items started but not yet finished. Throughput, the number of work items finished per unit of time. The work item age, the amount of lapse time between when a work item started and the current time. And I'll give you an example of this in Jira. Way if you're using Jira will make your lives a lot easier in just a minute. Cycle time, the amount of time lapsed between when a work item is started and when a work item is finished. So these are the key things they're saying. If you measure these things, this will give you the information you need to be able to improve your the flow. So that's some stuff from Pro Kanban Guides. Check it out, and also the particularly that the Kanban Pocket Guide. And I will send those links out in email to everybody at the end of this. Okay. Question for you. What would happen if we doubled the number of vehicles entering this section of road? So we've got all these cars here, and we really need to get more traffic through. So obviously we ought to just go ahead and double the number of vehicles on this because we need more cars to get through. Oh, it doesn't show it as we do it. Let's see if I can get it to show that in a second. So if we double the number of vehicles, will there be better flow or will there be worse flow? Meaning, will more people get through this section or will fewer people get through this section per unit of time? And, whoops, let's see if I can get that to show me that because I want to see. There we go. Okay. So there will be worse flow. Few people, 5% said that there will be better flow. If we do start putting more cars into this, there's a very high chance that we will get, like if you look right there, see how those cars are trying to change lanes and kind of cutting people off. If we have even more cars, we may even come to a complete standstill at a certain point. So chances are the flow will probably be worse if we add more cars to it based on how packed it is now. Now, we could experiment, right? If this was our combo board, we could try. We could try twice as much and say, hey, was that a good idea? And things were worse. Let's go back to what we were doing before. Maybe we should try going the other way. Okay, so our Kanban board is kind of like this, right? We're trying to get things from there, all the way from ready, all the way to done. And we're thinking about how the work flows across here. We're also thinking about how the work is handled in each individual piece of it, but like in the testing stage, in the development stage, in the requirement stage. But we don't want to optimize for this, for our testing, at the expense of optimizing for our cycle time through the entire system. One of the main ways we can control this is by limiting the work in progress. Now here, I've got everything set to 2. We might find that development can only handle one thing, but testing, since they can test multiple things at a time, putting 2 or 3 things in there is optimal, or maybe the other way around. But the way that we're managing the flow is managing how much work we allow to be pulled into each column at a time. And like I showed you earlier, we get over it and it should show us that there's an issue there. In this case, work in progress limit exceeded. Does your team use work in progress limits? Are you using these? Or do you pretend you use them? And the reason this can be important is this oftentimes is one of the main ways you can control your flow and make sure that you've got enough attention focused on the things that are in progress in order to get them done in a way that gives you repeatability, that makes you predictable. So no idea of what they should be for your particular team, but this can be a really good way to make sure that you don't have people pulling in more work when really what they need to do is go figure out why some other work hasn't been done. If you think, or is either blocked or just needs more help in getting it through. If you think of a manufacturing line, when the cars are moving through the manufacturing line, if there's a problem, they stop the line instead of just letting cars pile up. You can't just have cars, it's on the line. It's not going to make just a cartoonish mass there. They stop the line to fix the problem, and people from downstream come upstream to see what the problem is, and people from upstream come downstream, and you've got everybody there to fix the problem, then go back to what they were doing, which is a lot more efficient than having these huge piles of partially completed cars that were pulled off the line. Okay. But we need to get more things done at the same time. I've mentioned this before. I'm going to just throw this really fast in case you haven't seen it before. Here's work in progress of 4, right? In these cases, these projected value of these 4 things are going to be $100,000 per year. So the end of year 1 year, nothing, we've got no money, right? Because we're just going to start getting the value from that at the end of year 1. So after the second year, then we'll make $100,000 a year on these 4 projects. Well, the alternative way to approach it would be, let's do a work in progress of 1, and we'll complete that first one, and then we can earn money on it for the rest of the year. We'll complete the green one, then we'll earn money on it for the rest of the year. We'll complete this one, then we'll earn money on it for the rest of the year. And we'll complete this one, and it finishes the same time, focusing our efforts on finishing work, on doing everything we can to finish stuff instead of starting everything at the same time. Now, it depends on the project, and this is idealized, but this is, teams often do the opposite of this to their harm. And in this case, when we get through, instead of $400,000 at the end of year 2, we've got $550,000. So this is it's a simple thing, but this is where work in progress can really help us. I had work in progress 2 at the top. I'm not sure why I've got that. It should be 1. Anyway, so there's the two approaches. Now, we may find that doing 4 projects at a time is optimal. And if that's the case, then we shouldn't try to start 8 projects at the same time, right? Or maybe it's 2, or maybe it's 1, or whatever the number is that we find. So what does your team's work look like? Does it look like option 1, where you've got 4 things in progress at a time? Or does it look more like, I've got option A and option A. Okay. Or option B, where it's work in progress with 2 things, or 1 thing at a time. Yeah, good point, Astrid, about the value of money now is worth more than the value of money in the future. Okay, and this is typical. Usually, most organizations tend toward having more things in progress at a time. Oftentimes, we're doing that in ways that make all of them slower, instead of meaning that we actually get more stuff done. We actually get less stuff done over the year by doing that in many situations than if we were to focus on finishing something, and finishing something. That slide is random. I think I reordered it and didn't mean to have this there. I think this is actually Jira showing what their board looks like. And in here, they've got 3 things in the code review when they're saying their max is only 2. Okay, and here's the thing from Jira I want to show you. I don't know if you've noticed, on some boards you'll have these little lines like this. That tells how long a card has been in the current column. You can turn it on right here in Jira by going days and columns, show a visual indicator. This is a huge benefit of being able to look at your board and say, what's holding us up? If you've got lots of things on the board, it's kind of hard to see, or it may be hard to remember. But this makes it really easy to see what are the things that just aren't getting done. And then in your stand-up, you can make sure that those things are going to get moved over the line. Let's see, where are we at time? Okay, good. Kanban board design. Here are just a couple. This is a common way that you'll see boards created where I've seen people do this where you've got a swim lane for Bob and a swim lane for Sue. This is focused on what people are doing, not focused on how they can work together to deliver return on investment. So this is a group of individuals rather than a team. If you have a board set up like this, you might stop and ask yourself, are we really focused on delivering the value, getting the return on investment as a team? Or is there something about this work that just makes it to where we're not really even trying to work as a team? We just need to be able to be managed in that way. There might be reasons for doing this, but usually this is an indicator that there's things that could be improved. This could represent the same thing, but the team is focused on how do they deliver stuff. Now you may say we need to know what people are working on. Now sometimes that can be a good, healthy thing. Sometimes it can be a way of micromanaging, but let's say you do need to do that. Here's one way that I've seen teams do that with a Kanban board is you've got some type of icon or magnet or something representing each person, and they can just put it on what they're working on. It doesn't mean that that's their story. It's still owned by the team, but it's showing here's where I'm spending my time. And then we've got somebody over here in green that's not, maybe they're out on vacation or they're available to help. They're jumping around helping people whenever they need it. I've also seen where they're doing that. And for this particular team, it worked better they'd be working on two things at the same time. So we've got, this person right here, they're working on these two things. We've got this person working up on testing up there. Oh, my hand disappears. Okay. But they're also down here and they've got capacity to work on something else. And then over there in requirements, we've got two people working on that particular one together. So these are just ways to visualize the work in ways that teams have found helpful. Another useful thing I've seen teams do is showing a box to show the capacity, to show the work in progress. Kind of like we were thinking of the vest for the kids. It's like, oh, we've got capacity to put something into development. But we can't pull anything into requirements until we actually move something along because there's no slot for it. Really want this is they want to have an expedited lane, which means if there's anything in that lane, it gets worked on before anything else below. This can be a really bad thing, but if the stakeholders really understand that putting something through as expedited means we slow down everything else, and maybe we're only limiting it to one thing instead of I've got multiple things in progress here. If they really understand that and understand the trade-offs they're making, this can be valuable because there may be some things that getting through expedited has huge return on investment for them. So it's a story with a really high return on investment. Here's another Kanban board that I thought was an interesting idea where you're moving your cards across, but you're keeping track of the percentage of the work complete versus the amount of budget used. So the one over there that's in the red has used most of its budget and very little work is done. This one is almost completely done and they've done it really efficiently, very little of the budget. And this one right here is just tracking just like you'd expect. They've spent their same percentage done as the amount of budget that they've consumed. So this is another type of visualization that you may or may not seen before, but can be really useful for explaining the state of things. This is a board where they're saying we've got discovery Kanban and then delivery Kanban. The big key thing here is that our work in progress limit has a lower bound to where you're saying we want to make sure that we've always got at least 5 things in requirements analysis because we need to make sure we've got enough stuff flowing through that the delivery Kanban that dev has something to work on. So it's a different kind of a different thought about the work in progress limit for not necessarily the development work, but just working through deciding what we're going to work on. You can also have Kanban boards that get more granular. So something like this to where we've got a story up there or a card up there that represents several things that, maybe across different teams, showing that these things all roll up into delivering that. So maybe even something like this where you've got, individual projects and those all roll up into the program cards on the program and those programs roll up into different initiatives. So it's just the idea, I just want to give you an idea that you can make these things to where you're drilling into them at different levels. Or something like this, right? We've got these overall things that are keeping track of the budget for it, and those all map to individual stories roll up into that. Here's an example of what that work looks like at Kanbanize, to where we've got, if you notice, so here's the quality improvement initiative right here. Well, that tracks back up to the quality improvement initiative over there, showing that it's 33% done because these cards are 33% done. And then we've got sales process initiative that has these other cards associated with it. So it's doing that type of thing, but the system's keeping track of it. Just because you can do stuff like this doesn't mean it will actually be useful to you, but the fact you can gives you some options if your organization is looking for reporting in ways that they need to see things at higher levels than maybe what you need as the team. There's ways to automate that. Okay, and last key thing I want to talk about, I think it's the last thing, is cumulative flow diagram. A lot of your tools can produce this, but if you look at, that's kind of a little bit blurry, isn't it? But if I've got a process where I go requested, in progress, deployed to staging, tested in staging, deployed to prod, verified by users, and then done, and we're moving through that, those colors, you can see as these stories move through this historically, I can see how many of these, like where we had stuff in requested, and it sat there for a while before we finished it. And then how much was in progress. And we get over here, and we've got a bunch of stuff that we've said is verified. The green up there is showing that we had a lot of stuff that was verified by users, but we haven't deployed to done yet. This chart probably is one of the best way to represent the flow and being able to identify where your bottlenecks are, because it gives you lots and lots of information of how much work was started and how much was finished and how it moved through the different stages. So these can be really, really valuable. Probably do a whole talk on these sometimes, and that might be worth doing. Oh, the other thing I want to mention, Kanban with Scrum. Oftentimes you'll find situations where your sprints are very lumpy, and you're literally sprinting where you get to the end and there's not much to do because things either aren't done or because the people are working on testing and you're not starting new work. And then you get to the beginning and these people are all busy. Then these people are all busy as you move everything through because you're not focused you're not focused on the flow of the work going through. Kanban with sprints using Kanban can help smooth out that flow. Did I call it? Okay. And I've been on teams that started with sprints. They went to more of a Kanban approach because they want that smooth flow, allowed them to deliver more rapidly, but they still kept their cadences for doing things like or doing demos and doing retrospectives. And there's lots of stuff they still did on their cadence. And the main thing I want to point out here is you can keep the cadences for things that you need with Scrum while still going to more of a continual flow. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Okay, I think this was to remind me, I will send you an email with a link to sign up for a trial account of Kanbanize if you are interested in it, if it seems interesting, worth playing with. If you do sign up for one, though, I'll send you another link. I'll get a notification of that in a few days after you sign up. I'll send you something else to get us on the schedule for 30 minutes to actually talk through setting that up. If you just want to set it up to play with it on your own, that's great. If you want me to walk you through it 30 minutes, I'm going to talk through some of the challenges that you're seeing and how this might be able to help with it. I'd love to do that as well, but that link will go out in the email, and use the link that I send you because it will give you 90 days. I think the other one only gives you 30 days, so you'll have more time to play with it. And if you want to play with it just to see what it looks like for a few months and then throw it away, that's fine too. It's a great way to kind of get hands-on experience with Kanban. Okay, and do we have time for a quiz? I think we can fit it in here. Okay, great. So join the quiz. I will throw it here one more time just in case anyone's not able to get to it. And here, just in case somebody didn't give me their email address or I'm not going to have it, there's the link for the Kanbanize thing.
1341949 slido.com.
Hang on, let me mute everybody just so we don't have any surprises. Okay, we got 58 people, and we hit a milestone on this this Lunch and Learn. I think we had 400 people that replied yes or maybe. So that's the first time we've hit the 400 level. And as you join it, I will mention, when you do get those invites, if you can say yes, or maybe if you think you're interested in it, I'm going to try to start taking that information to be able to, one, I'd like to be able to send out the links at the end to anyone that said maybe, so that will be a way to indicate, hey, I may not be able to make it, but I want the information. That's going to be coming. But it also gives me the ability to see what were people interested in, even if it didn't fit their schedule. So that's one reason to click on those when you get them. And as always, feel free to forward those on to anyone that you think might benefit from it. If I get enough no's on something like, okay, people weren't interested in that topic at all. Okay, we'll give it 5 more seconds. We've got 82 people. Oh, we've got to compete for something, don't we? Okay, let's, I tell you what, let's do one of the shirts, right? We will give away a shirt. I think I've still got all the sizes up through 3XL. So here is our shirt that I use to get teams. Turn your video on. We believe in face-to-face communication. So that's what you're competing for here. So good luck and let's go. First question, which two are a key part of Kanban? Visualizing work, sprints, domain-driven design, focus on flow, or IKEA vests? Which two? So there's 2 answers here. Which 2 of these are a key part of Kanban? Time's up. And yes, visualizing flow, or visualizing work and focusing on flow. Very good. What is closely associated with managing flow? Is it the J curve, limiting work in progress, starting with what you do now, or explicit policies? Which of these is most closely associated with managing flow from what we talked about today? And yes, most people got it. It's limiting WIP, because that's how you decide how much work is entering the system or entering a column. Okay, leaderboard. Top spot, Yo-Yo, followed by Richard, Scott, John, and Jeff. We've got lots of people vying for the top space. Very good. What is next week's talk about? Is it Agile Principles and Risky Barbecue? Is it Chris Stone? Agile Missteps, Unintended Consequences? Or the Curse of the Testing Pyramid? Which of those is coming next week? And yes, it's Agile Missteps and Unintended Consequences. The next week is the Agile Principles and Risky Barbecue. And looks like Richard pulls into the top spot. A Kanban system is often represented by a what? Often represented by a Kanban board. Very good. No one voted for my chain link sculpture idea. Okay. Richard retains the top spot. What chart can give you the most insight into your flow, cycle time, and bottlenecks? Is it your organizational chart? You might be able to make a case for that, but organizational chart, a Gantt chart, a burn down chart, Fibonacci probability chart, or cumulative flow diagram? And yes, it's a cumulative flow diagram. And very good. Congratulations, Richard. So yes, can you get a recording? So Richard, send me an email just to make sure I remember. I don't remember if I've got your email,